we really wanted to bring together collectives to talk a bit about why they set up, what kind of music they promote, and really hopefully inspire you to do the same or to get involved with what they're doing. And it's the idea of this is that you can leave getting a good idea of what's involved and then go off and do it, and maybe you can come and talk about it in a year's time. I'd like to introduce our panelists, or have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to what's involved in setting up a collective. So, Sanjeev, do you want to start?
Yes, my name is Sanjeev, aka Superman on the Beat. I'm a producer, and also run a platform called Hip Hop Scotland. And yeah, we kind of platform hip hop artists and around Scotland, from Scotland, but also in Scotland. And we sort of bring touring artists, and then put on like local artists and support. And also just kind of connect the dots. Bring people together from all kind of different backgrounds, so yeah, that's really important to me, just to bring people together, so yeah.
Vicky.
Hi, I'm Vicky Kavanagh. I'm representing Works in Progress today, which is a collective that started out of EHFM Community Radio. There's 6 of us, and we have a bunch of different skill sets. There's sound folk, there's design, there's video, and of course, importantly, most of us are musicians or DJs. The night is focused around an open call for any kind of audio between 30 seconds and 30 minutes. That's literally the only brief. There's no barrier to entry. You could literally come out of your bedroom and submit something or perform live. And we do a broadcast day where we play all of the submissions, and then we have an evening of live performance across the kind of sound spectrum. And we've been going since 2023.
Thank you. Evie.
So I'm Evie Smith. Hi, I'm from the Forbidden Zone Collective. So Forbidden Zone Collective is a music arts promotions collective based in Edinburgh primarily, but we don't just promote bands from Edinburgh, we promote bands from all over Scotland, and sometimes we take touring bands as well. We aim to kind of focus on more niche genres, so say like Riot Girl or shoegaze or emo, goth rock as well, and to just kind of bring the community together and the kind of subgenres together in Edinburgh.
Thank you. And George, last but not least.
Hello, I'm George. I started, but there's now 5 of us in Crowded Flat. We're a promotions and like artist management company, collective, not company, in Scotland. Like emphasis on DIY and working class communities as well, being represented in music.
And you've all obviously very swiftly outlined the different types of collectives. This is a snapshot of the many different types there are in Scotland, and you're working with different genres and communities. And how would you individually define a collective? Because I know it's a fairly loose term, isn't it? Sanjeev, do you want to start on that again?
Yeah, sure. I think it's interesting because I think collectives can take different shapes and forms, and I think it sort of depends on what is needed in the space. I think that's important to think about, because for like Hip Hop Scotland, it's like I kind of do the organising and stuff like that, but then for different events that need different things, we'll work with other people. So we'll like collaboratively do shows with people, or we'll kind of work together with people instead of like booking them, if that makes sense. So it's more of like a family feel, and just to kind of connect the dots. I think that's important for what Hip Hop Scotland does, is we try to like connect the dots between different communities.
And you've You already mentioned there's the rest of you. There's several in each of your collectives. I mean, how would you define your individual collectives and the term itself?
So I would say that Forbidden Zone is a collective. We started actually initially just because I didn't actually know much about what a collective was. I knew I wasn't a company. I knew we weren't a business, we weren't attached to any government body, and that we were working together with our skill sets to kind of form a community and to develop a community. Our end goal wasn't really so centered around money, it was more about more human needs, and I kind of feel like a collective has to be attached to that value, more of a human needs basis rather than a business basis.
Yeah, we really felt like there needed to be a space in Edinburgh to be able to share really any kind of experimental or unfinished music with the aim of, well, essentially just knowing that there were so many people in the city who were making sound of some kind but just didn't feel like there was a right space for it. So I think the collective sprung mainly from that idea and all of us getting around that idea. And then, I think a bunch of us turned up to the first meeting, but I think the collective formed out of those who remained to kind of make it actually happen. And it's not a term that we tend to use so much. I think we view ourselves as people that are documenting a snapshot in time in Edinburgh of experimental music, underground music, and allowing people to exist in that realm, whether it's they've been part of an event or they've been on the broadcast, and eventually we'd like to be able to do digital and physical releases of music as well, so that people can look back and go, oh, that's a scene that existed.
So George, what about yourself?
I think for us, I would definitely say we're a collective, and I think it's just because everything we do is based around community. And it may not seem like that to a lot of outside people who are looking in on what we do, but the shows that we put on, the festival that we put on, the bands that we represent, the way we kind of try and explain it is they're also your bands, your shows and your festivals, and we try and make everything reasonably priced. We talk to people in the community consistently that we're involved in about everything that we put on, and we're not putting anything on as a vanity project, you know what I mean? We want to put on properly good shows and festival lineups that are gender split and a good representation of everyone we think should be on a lineup, that the community that we're involved in and lucky enough to be a part of also wants to see, and not just 5 people who are in a lucky situation.
So, I mean, what inspired you to do it?
I grew up in the kind of Glasgow, what was punk scene, and then there was a lot of people that I knew that grew up with who had a lot of bad experiences in the scene, whether that's sexual assault or being misgendered or all these things, and then it kind of got to a point where, I was just a photographer in the scene, so I kind of had this outsider point of view on it. I had a lot of friends in the scene and stuff, so I was lucky that way, but we just kind of thought, well, if they can all do it and be arseholes about it, we can put on shows that are safe space, open to everyone, accessible, and if I can do it with no background and no degree in promotions, literally anyone else can.
Would you guys echo that?
I think Forbidden Zone's in a very similar situation with it was kind of I didn't feel like there was many places representing what I enjoyed in the scenes that I was in, and people that kind of had similar kind of ideas as me, or even gender. And I felt like the current space as it was at the time when I started promoting, because I used to be in a band, that's kind of how I started promoting, and the Forbidden Zone started out that. I was putting on my own gigs, and meeting lots and lots of people that were all about the place. I just wanted to bring people together, but the safe spaces kind of aspect of it was a really big part of it. I think we all kind of if you think about what's in mainstream music, it was about being an alternative to that. You know, the music industry is one of the biggest, probably one of the most problematic industries that we currently have, especially in the creative arts, and making it big in it is very difficult. It's very mentally taxing, and there's a lot of barriers to a lot of different people for that, and we wanted to give opportunity to people that wouldn't usually get that opportunity, but also make it kind of the fun spaces for that as well, that people can be valued and make music and feel valued for what they make, without the end goal of being millionaires, or without the kind of barriers to having that end goal as well. If that makes sense.
I mean, it's a good point, and you know, that idea of actually enjoying it and creating something that you like. I mean, Vicky, how much of a role does that play in, you know, inspiring what you do?
Massive, yeah. Every whip that we do is our favourite one, and there's always this electric atmosphere because we are putting on sometimes first-time performers on an amazing sound system in a really cool spot in Edinburgh. I think we're kind of giving people that opportunity to go like, this is Edinburgh, what? Like, it feels like Berlin or something, like something arty and cool, you know, and that just is like almost addictive, really. And then factor it in with doing it with, you know, 5 other people who I just respect and think are so cool and interesting and just so fun to work with. It's like the best night of our year when we do it.
And I mean, you're working with 5 other people. How do you make the decisions?
Yeah, so you know, I think we do have a flat hierarchy. I think that we love like getting together in the pub and just having like loads of ideas, throwing lots out there, and I think then once we've had that meeting, we then start to do the more like, okay, well, of all of those things, what's more realistic? I used to be a project manager, so I'm perhaps a little bit more minded with that kind of thing, but I think everybody is kind of working under that shared sense of purpose, and also we all understand that like we can shoot for the stars, but we don't have endless money, so we kind of try and settle for what we think will be the best minimum product, I guess, and that's always got to be, yeah, making sure that people can come and perform or submit their work without fear of judgment, and they can sound really good and they can look really good, and all of their pals can come, and it can be a really fun, weird night where you have no idea what's going to happen next.
I mean, Sanjeev, you pretty much sound like a benign dictator in your collective. That I imagine there's not too many arguments because you're like, all right, well, this is me doing it, but you know, we're sharing the tasks. But are there any moments where you do need to sort of seek agreements with the people you're working with on the individual projects?
Yeah, 100%. Because we want to like represent the scene, so I think it's important that the scene has a say in that, and like who we're representing. And also like when we're doing shows, we work a lot with other collectives, and also other people as well. So yeah, it's nice to do that, and also like when we make decisions, like I always try to ask other people what they think, like in this scene or other artists we're working with, or even like when we do collaborative shows, like with the artist, like a local artist being like the headline, we'll like do it together. So yeah, it's not just like a typical promoter where we just like book artists and then that's it. Like the communication's always going. So yeah.
How about you guys? I mean, do you have a flat decision-making process, or is it by majority? What's the process?
Nah, I don't, like in the most like cliche way possible. It doesn't sound very like corporate or whatever. There's 5 of us and we all have the exact same share, we all have the exact same involvement, maybe in different areas because we all do different things in it. We have more sway, but yeah, it's very split, even balanced, and I know everyone tells you that that's not possible, but it is very much possible.
So what happens when you disagree?
We just disagree and we talk it out.
Right.
Instead of like, if we had something that someone really didn't want to do, we put it down to like a vote or something. Okay. And just do it that way.
Is it similar with you?
I was going to say, like, I think a big part of the decision making and the working with other people, especially in a collective kind of sense, is that it's not, when you're promoting gigs, having the mindset of doing it for yourself. It's not about you, it's about the people that you put on stage, and it's about having that passion for music, the passion for the people that you're working with. And everyone, I'm very happy, I didn't say how many people were in our collective, but we're at kind of around 5 now, 4 and maybe 1 collaborator, but we have a house photographer as well, which is saying on the front there, and Danny, who we founded a collective together, and my friends Sabine and Tony, who we work in different aspects. You know, we have different jobs, and we don't necessarily always kind of stay in our lanes. I think it just depends on what night's being put on, what specialties we have, what interests we have. And just what experience we have as well. And I think that's not just on a practical sense of like skills, as someone might be better at communicating with bands, someone might be better at stage managing. It's also about like the kind of emotional side of it as well. I've always kind of said I'm a really big warrior, and Danny, who I founded the collective with, has always been very good at getting me out of that worrying and kind of having that kind of more positive side. So it's how you work with each other on an emotional basis as well, and I think putting your egos aside is really important.
I mean, I think that something that took me a long time to learn was that a lot of the arguments and I think that's the right word to use, with what we do we're really kind of rooted in fear. Fear of doing the wrong thing or taking the wrong decision, and coming at it with a different sense of fear. We kind of got out of that in the pandemic, interestingly enough, because we're like, well, we're doing stuff and hardly anyone else is, so regardless of whether we are set up or not, at least we're doing something, and there was this, it kind of really stopped a lot of that. But I mean, how would you sort of view that? I mean, you've touched on it, that you've got that reassurance, but I mean, the rest of you, how have you overcome those fears? I mean, even just stepping into the unknown and launching the event, or launching what you do. I mean, George, let's start with you, because you look like you're about to lift the mic up anyway. Yeah?
No, like what you're saying, when no one else is doing something, just like you could put on your first 5 shows if that's what you want to do, and you might sell 10, 15, whatever tickets for the first 5 shows. And I know financially that's not generally feasible, but just keep doing it. Every collective that I've genuinely seen that started in the last like 5-10 years, and always seems to start as like a uni project or something, and then people seem to just give it up after uni, or they give it up after like 2-3 shows. But then the ones that I know who are really cool and doing really cool stuff in Glasgow are the ones who've been active for at least 3-4 years. Do you know what I mean? You have to, it's terrifying to do it, but then also at the same time, nobody gives a shit what you're doing. Like, no one cares if you put on a show or if you put on a nightclub, until they do care. And when they do care, that's when they're buying tickets to your gig or your club, and then they want to be your friend, and then you can tell them to go away. So.
Vicky, what about you? I mean, when you set out, was there any worry, or did you just say, well, we're just going to give it a shot?
Yeah, I didn't really have any worry about starting the project. I mean, the backing of EHFM was absolutely crucial in that. The directors, Jamie, Fiona, Matt, they've spent the last 7 years, building this amazing platform, amazing following all over the world, not just in Edinburgh, not just in Scotland. And as I said, like, it's an untapped, in my opinion, resource of all these people who can do all these amazing things. I mean, it's practically like a creative agency in and of itself. So for something like this to be started was, there was no fear, because I just felt like it was coming from such a strong foundation, and also the people that I do it with, some of whom are here tonight, Rory, Oscar. But yeah, there's just such a sense of positivity. All of us are experienced in running shows and radio shows and other creative ventures, so there was a lot of experience to draw on. And we kind of just knew that there was a need for this in Edinburgh. We kind of just knew from talking to various people that they wanted a home for music that they didn't know how to categorise. We've been calling it difficult and worrying ambient music recently. So no, I don't tend to get very scared of things. It's one of my sort of faults as well as traits.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that for me the biggest fear was having an empty room. So that actually made me overcome a fear of actually just going up and badgering folk to come along to the early Born to Be Wide nights, where it was just like, going into record shops and just going up to people. Yeah. People would go, how did you get that person to come and play their favourite records? I just badgered them until they, unless they said a hard no, it was like, all right, there's the guy from the Vita band again. I mean, this is when they were, in the first time around, and he was in my local, and this is about the third time. I was like, if you don't want to do it, just tell me. And he was like, yeah, I do. And I was like, right, next month. And that's how it happened. But it was kind of similar with someone like Irvin Welsh, where I think I'd asked him a couple of times, and then, the third time he was like, yeah, fine. Turned up with a bag of records and started with It's Raining Men, and it started to rain heavily outside and no one left. So
there was only that famous Sex Pistols show, there was only 20 odd folk there, and they all went on to be in the biggest bands in the UK.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if it's an empty room, you can still have influence and change the trajectory of people's lives.
But also on the reverse, I think, no one knows anybody on our lineups. There's no headliner, there's no support. And yet we packed out our first show because people literally just want to see themselves up there, having a good time, making weird noises, and that was also really cool. You could be really afraid, like, I haven't booked a big name, nobody knows, this person's never performed outside of their bedroom, and we were so overwhelmed by the response to the first show, and I think that just kind of proves that, as well as being plucky and going after the big names, just put on people, put on normal people and encourage them to come out of their bedroom. They can be behind a screen if they want, but they're making noise in a public space, and that's really fun.
We had a policy in the first year that you weren't actually allowed to DJ if you'd ever DJed before. It sounds counterintuitive, but we felt that the idea was that we wanted to hear what people would play if they were just pleasing themselves. And that was, we relaxed that obviously after a year, but it was really interesting because, we would kind of teach them what to do, and we actually launched I wouldn't say DJ careers, but a couple of people that had their first shot at Born to Be Wide night ended up running their own club nights and stuff for a number of years. Sanjeev, what were this, on that element of overcoming fears, what were the big ones for you, if you had any that you had to overcome to get started?
I think generally fear, I think it depends on why you're doing it, and I think that's a big part of why I started doing it, or we started doing it, was, like we said already, to represent the people that weren't being represented. And obviously hip hop stems from being a voice for the minority, so that was something that we wanted to keep to the core. And even like spiritually, I feel like if you do something with the right intention, and you just keep going, and you're doing it for the right reasons, it will come back around eventually at some point. And I think that's why like vision is really important, to see like where it could go, like the persistence to keep going through the difficult times. So like we mentioned earlier as well, like even if nobody turns up, like don't let that change your mind, because you're doing it for the right reasons and you love doing it. So don't let the other noise change your mind. Because like we started with like a show in a bar with like 8 people about 3 years ago. At the first like 5 shows it was like 8 to 10 people. But the people that were there loved it and had an amazing time, and that was enough for me. So we just kept going, and now we did like the O2 Academy about a month ago. That's like 2,000 people. So like from 8 people in about 3 years to 2,000 people. Like just out of persistence and just loving what I'm doing and representing the community. Like that's what's possible. Like if you just keep going, and yeah, just like, it's kind of cheesy, but just don't give up and lose sight of why you're doing it. Like just always remember that.
Has there been a point where you almost gave up?
Yeah, very.
What was the closest you came to giving up, and what caused that?
Yeah, I think probably there's been a few times, but the closest was probably last year when we had like a run of shows, and just like we were just really struggling to sell tickets. So yeah, and it was to the point where if there was like 3 shows in a row and we were losing like quite a lot of money, which obviously it's not why I do it, but obviously you need to make the basics to get through. So I think that was quite tough, because obviously I loved what I'm doing and I wanted to keep doing it, but it needs to make sense as well. Like you need to be able to logistically do it.
So what got you to go for that next show, motivate yourself to do it? What got you through that, really?
I think it was the community around me, and like the people I had around me. I'm fortunate enough to have some like really amazing people around me that just support me, and like we all just support each other. So like we all just get each other through, and I think it's really important to have that support around you, because if I never had that, like I probably would have stopped, and then we wouldn't have been able to do the show we did at O2 Academy. Like we wouldn't have been able to put on a lot of the artists that probably wouldn't have got an opportunity. And I think that's so important, just to stay like independent as well, and be like a bridge. I think that's important for what we do.
Vicky, Evie, have you reached the point yet where you've had a moment where you wanted to pack it all in? Because you've not been doing it that long, and it sounds like it's going pretty well so far.
I think with promotions, because you're not on stage, it can be quite an unseen role in the kind of music community, and it's very hard work, and it's constant work. I remember at the beginning of the Forbidden Zone, I would be putting on sometimes up to 6 gigs a month, like just completely burning myself out, because I was so driven to build kind of a community and build spaces and just like meet lots of people as well. So it was just constant work, and also on top of that, like working and going to uni and like having kind of, I mean, all the money at that point was going from our bank account, and I was going into quite a lot of debt because of my collective. So I was putting in a lot, and I think that's just like, I think it's probably just the type of person I am, but I really just wanted to make it work, and sometimes it felt like it was just never gonna happen. So I faced burnout a lot, but it's just about kind of, at that point, realising, okay, I need to go back to square one. Why did I start doing this? Instead of focusing on the negatives, because there can be a lot that goes wrong. There can be a lot of problems arise. It can be a lot of, I think, a lot of my burnout came from I've been undermined quite a lot in the spaces, in the music space that I love so dearly, and that was really difficult to get through. But just reminding myself why I was doing it, who I was doing it for, and actually I'm very, very lucky to work with my best friends as well, and that they are very understanding, empathetic people. So.
George, I mean, you've been at it for longer. You must have had a couple of occasions where you were like, fuck this. I'm going to do something else.
Once a week.
And I mean, what was the worst one? What was the closest you've come to just going, I've had enough, and how did you get through it?
Probably last year or the year before.
I thought you were going to say last week.
Last Friday and the Friday before. We work with bands and artists and stuff in management, as well as doing the promotion side and stuff. And it's like the most gut-wrenching feeling in the world when you work with this band and you get in and like day one, you're like, I love your music, I love you as people, and then you work with them for so long, and then they get to a certain level, and then they do the right thing, which is go, I'm going to go something bigger, and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then that happened to us like 2 or 3 times in the space of like 6 months, and I kind of just got to the point, like, it was annoying because all our shows were selling really well, but I was like, I'd been focusing on management so much, and then I was just like, these people that are like, they're doing the right thing, they should go off and they should go and be represented by bigger people, but it's like trying to learn how to not take that personally and how to understand that at the end of the day, it is also a career for them and a career for yourself. And that's as close as I've come, and I was just lucky that I got through it because, again, similar to yourselves, really good community, you've got people around me who are cool. And I'm still friends with all those people who were in those projects that moved on to bigger things. They're great people, they're great musicians, but it's trying to take things not personally that I'm really bad at.
I mean, you've touched on the financial dimension of this, and I think that, you know, that is genuinely a real fear, and I think that, you know, if you can't pay your rent, then you're going to get, you know, somewhere down the line you'll get evicted, or if you can't eat. And, you know, I've known so many promoters starting out that have, you know, they've worked with bands who haven't done anything to, you know, help sell the show or promote the show, and they've, you know, they're ended up being the ones who spending their rent, losing their rent money on a show. So I understand that as a really legitimate fear, but even taking a step back, how do you make it work when you have no money? What's the, you know, getting, you know, we had the good fortune that the venue liked our idea, they liked us, so they just gave us a free space, and then they found us a sponsor for something called, was it Mud Flaps or a Mud Pack or some fucking dreadful liqueur who gave us 50 quid a month in sponsorship, and we spent it on Red Stripe to put behind the DJ decks. I tried that stuff a couple of years ago and it was minging. It's such a bad beer. In fact, Yannicka, who's taking the photographs, had a can too, and she tried to palm her can. She couldn't drink it either off one of me, and she drank even less. I rumbled that though. But this was like, we weren't losing money because there was, you know, our flyers were made on a little machine in the St. James's Centre, like, to make business cards, and if it was going to be a big night, we printed 50, and if it was just a small one, we just get 20 done, right, just to hand out to special people. But it was just much more, we could get away with it because there weren't any overheads. But if you're paying artists and you're paying sound engineers and all those costs, how do you do it? I mean,
before we move to that, thanks very much for all of you for coming. Thanks to the whole team, and
particularly thanks to these amazing panelists who have given us a really great
when we started putting on shows at the beginning, we worked with the Barker Nice and Sleeves in Glasgow to do it upstairs. So it's funny how it came about because I also advocate a lot for like access and disability access. And stuff like that, so we were looking for like bars that, because that was really important to me. If anytime we do shows, like that's the thing that we've never not done, is it's always been an accessible venue, and there's something I told myself that I would never not do type thing. So we went to them and they were like, oh, our venue like isn't accessible because it's downstairs. And then I spoke to them and I was like, is there anything else we could do? Like, there's a space upstairs, like there's a bar space they had. And they were like, we could see what we could do. And I think that was important that they were really open, because a lot of other venues would just be a lot more not accessible. But they were like, yeah, let's try and do something. So then they bought like these like mini speakers and decided to do a setup in the bar. And they were like, because it's kind of like a makeshift setup, we can just give you it for free, but just like do like a regular night every month. So that's how it started, but just like a regular night. It was like free entry, and that's how we sort of built up a community. And we built people that kind of knew what we did. So it actually turned out that access was a blessing in disguise, because if we started downstairs, we didn't be able to afford to pay for it, and then it ended up being upstairs. So it's quite funny how it all worked out. And yeah, I think also just like learning how to do things yourself as well. So like I learned how to make posters, like I learned how to make like spreadsheets, like I learned how to do a lot of the stuff, which means we didn't have to like outsource, and also just like asking friends and people who like believed in what it was about to like chip in and help.
I think that's the thing, ask is really asking is a really important thing. It's how you ask, obviously, and not, approaching stuff with a sense of entitlement, but coming into it and seeing what you can offer, what can you bring to the table without, and the venue, which was actually the name of the venue, was, they were really understanding, and where we moved to after that were really understanding. It was the street at the top of Broad Street, and they wanted to broaden their crowd, and we brought a different crowd in, and it was a kind of symbiotic relationship. And everywhere we worked with, we were like, all right, well, this is who we're addressing, so we can give something back without it being, we just want a free space and then we'll move on to somewhere else. And pretty much everywhere we stuck with those venues for years, I mean, going back quickly to the financial element, because I think it's important that people understand that, and then moving on to that exchange when you don't have money, what you can, suggestions for what you can offer. I mean, Vicky, did you guys have to put your own money into launching it, and how much did you start with?
There wasn't like a sort of starting pot. It was more kind of, there were some upfront costs that we did decide to cover. Things like we did invest in kind of nicely printed posters and things like that, which you don't have to do. That was just kind of a preference of ours. As I said, we come from a larger community in EHFM. All of us have a lot of experience doing various creative endeavours, which means that we kind of know what to do already and where we can afford to spend a bit of money, what we reasonably might make back. And I would say, yeah, we spent, maybe a couple hundred in total in upfront costs, which we then reimbursed ourselves. We did a budget. I think that's really important. So you need to know kind of what your upfront costs will be. Use a spreadsheet, love a spreadsheet, and then that helps you determine how much can you charge for tickets, with the aim being that you really charge as little as you possibly can. And anyone obviously who can't afford to come, they can just ask and they'll be allowed to come into the gig for free. We actually did our first show for free. There was a bit of a learning around that because there was a massive drop-off. But top promoter tip, on the radio we were like, it's going to sell out, guys, move fast. And then like 10 people with tickets showed up and about 90 people without tickets showed up. So there's ways to work that, but The other thing is just in terms of like the venue, free is great, but maybe considering kind of alternate venues. So we actually held our first event in an art gallery, Embassy Gallery, and that allowed us to run our own bar because there was no bar there. It has to be suggested donation, but that allowed us to pay the artists and recover some costs as well. The remainder of the costs we relied on kind of free use of things like a sound system. Again, that can kind of bite you because on the night of our first event, the speakers actually didn't work that we borrowed. But
we had that two exploding guitar amps when we'd done a barter deal, and that was stressful.
But then someone came to our rescue and gave us another set of free speakers that did work. So you can work with it.
I mean, Evie, you've already alluded to the fact that you were going into debt yourself, you know.
It's okay, me too, don't worry.
You know, is that something that, you know, obviously that's a, you know, it's a brave move, but I mean, is it something, you know, are there any other ways that you've learned now which would mean you didn't have to do that?
Yeah.
Would you do it differently now?
So, how the Friend Zone works with paying bands is it's an equal ticket split. We've only very recently moved towards flat fee for some of our kind of more bigger artists that we booked as of recently, but generally we'll outline like before we book someone what the situation is with payment. But from the beginning, it's always been kind of an equal ticket split. So if the band, if they have a free band bill, and they all get £20, the promoter will get £20 and our house photographer will as well. So it is like everyone gets the same amount. We're not taking a higher percentage. And for a very, very long time, I was very, very stern about this and I was not budging on that. Which means if we start losing money, that's a problem. Because we could say that we want to take a higher percentage and take the higher percentage and then have enough money to run it. But actually, I always thought it was important to kind of give the credit back to the bands because that's why people are there. I would say, first time round mistake, don't do it out of your own bank account. It's not feasible. You can't track things very well. So set up a bank account, savings account, set up like a Monzo account or something. We use Monzo, it's very handy. Do it out there, it's easier to track the payments. I think I was just getting very carried away and kind of like, I'm going to get this money back eventually. And we found some ways to kind of pay ourselves back eventually. And we have a kind of fund, a pot of money now because of like fundraisers we've done, or the club nights, say for instance, we take the payments from our club nights. But yeah, that if I started with a separate bank account, it really works out.
Good advice. What about you, George? I mean, you know, how did it work?
Yeah, we learned quite early on as well to have a business account, and it does just help to have a separate account in general just to manage the finances. All the money that goes into Crowded Flat through ticket sales and everything else that we do goes straight back into Crowded Flat. Obviously there's been times where I've been skint and I need to buy a pint and I will take money out of the account, like we all do at Crowded Flat, but the money is there to be put back into Crowded Flat, and we are working towards Crowded Flat being our job, so that's what we all want. But until we get to a point where we think that that's the point where we should be taking money, it just keeps going back in, and putting on shows is expensive, but anything is a stage if you're brave enough, I'm telling you. So go to your local pub, ask them if you've got a stage in the corner. If they say no, go to the pub next door, someone will say yes. Do free shows if you can. We done stuff in a pub called the Variety Bar on Sauchiehall Hall Street, busiest like pub in Glasgow for pubs and gigs and stuff. And I worked there, and they were like, I was like, can I put on like strip back sets? And they were like, yeah, sure. And I was like, can you pay the bands? And they were like, yeah, alright, why not? Because they knew that we'd be able to get like 40, 50 times the amount they're paying for one band on the bar. Do you know what I mean? And it just goes around asking. Ask everyone anything. And also speak to bartenders because they're all struggling creatives. One of them will photograph your gig. This is experience for me, by the way. So.
Yeah, I think that this is, you know, that asking, going back to that is, I think is something that a lot, it's not very British, and I think that, you know, again, when you have no other option, it makes you braver to do it, and it's also it's how you ask, and I think that if you're selling it in the sense, and I use selling in you know, inverted commas, if you're approaching someone, you have a discussion about what you want to do and what you're going to bring to the table, and that exchange dimension, I think, is really important, and just be really, really clear, because I think quite often people beat around the bush a bit, or they hope that they've implied it, and sometimes it's really better to be quite direct about why you're asking for things, so there's no room for doubt. And you know, I used to hope that everyone that we invite to DJ or speak at our event would share it, and then I realised that a large proportion of them didn't do it. But when you asked, they were like, "Yeah, sure." People don't. It's not even out of badness. They don't necessarily think of it. And you know, by the signs of it, you had the good fortune that at your bar they understood, and they immediately got the benefit, which is an amazing thing. When you're first asking, you get that, and by the signs of it, sleazies were similar. I mean, how was it for you guys? I mean, when you approached, you know, the embassy, how did you do it?
So we actually knew, I don't know if you know about Embassy Gallery, but it's an artist-run gallery, and they are just a committee of young creatives, and they put on all sorts of amazing events. But one of us, Oscar, knew the committee, and so yeah, just posed the idea of doing it in a slightly different location to normal gigs. And I think it's actually turned into something that has become a bit of a principle for us, that we aren't going to put on shows somewhere where there's this commercial pressure to sell spaces, to sell booze. And it's really, I mean, the first event, it really made it so much easier because we were able to get into the venue the night before to set everything up and do decor and make the space look amazing. And we've been able to do that since with other venues as well. So yeah, considering venues where you don't have that commercial pressure can really help you put on an amazing show. And we also found it really inspiring in terms of, you know, we would really like to open a venue at some point that has the same ethos but is more music focused, because we've obviously been sort of mostly in art spaces as well. That's a pipe dream, but you know, it's inspired us as well as kind of enabling us to put on the shows.
What about you?
So we have like a house spot at Banshee's Labyrinth, which is in Edinburgh, and how we got that was, it was a place that I hung out all the time because I'm a big goth. So I was in there all the time, and also because I was in bands, I was also playing in there as well. Not only does Banshee provide a backline, which I'm a bit averse to places that don't. I think everywhere should, because I think it's just more accessible for people. But they provide a backline, and they also had, at the time, a really, really low hire fee because they were wanting people to see themselves as a music venue again. And the only reason why I found this out was through talking to people. And I think like my one main piece of advice for promoting and venues and like finance is like the way you talk to people and like the way that you approach people is so important, and just going into every conversation with a completely open mind, like no preconception of how it's going to go, what's going to come out of it. I mean, if you want to go into negotiations, that's fine, but also being open to what's going to come your way and the opportunities that you're going to take. And because of that conversation, I found a lot of opportunity there. They needed people to have gigs there. I asked them for a monthly slot. They gave us a monthly slot basically off the bat. And that's because they realised the value in that. There will be some venues that are very expensive. There will be some venues that are put a lot of pressure on ticket sales and alcohol sales. I personally tend to try and stay away from those because I think it's unfair and I think it's inaccessible to a lot of people and people starting up in bands as well. Because I would hate to be a promoter breathing down bands' necks about ticket sales. Sometimes it has to be the case, but that was a big reason why the Forbidden Zone started as well, as we want to take the pressure off the bands, you know. It's meant to be fun, you know, you're not meant to be worrying about how many tickets you sold, if you're going to get paid or not, you know.
I mean, I think it's, you know, I've just, you know, present a slightly different perspective on this where venues are concerned, because we've built really good relationships with venues around Wide Days where they literally have to pay, you know, their staff, and they have to pay the PRS and everything else that goes along with running the venues. So we would generally try and find out where they were good enough to give us the hire for free because they believed in what we're doing. We also try to find a way to make sure that those spaces were busy so that we were giving something back for their sort of belief in us. And I think that has led to you know, us pretty much working with, you know, a couple of spaces for almost as long as the event's been going, you know, and it is that, I guess it's always depends on the dimension of what you're doing and on each one, but I do think it's really important to understand the other perspective as well, where they're coming from, what their needs are. So it becomes an exchange, and it is that, you know, you touched on with the connection point, you're building those relationships with people and you know, friendships, you know, all of that. And it's, you know, those of you who are here for the first time, this is a really good step for doing it, you know, because people think, oh, it's, you know, you can only do stuff if you know millions of people, and it's like, well, no, if you're hanging out, you're immediately going to meet a bunch of people straight away, you know. I know we're conscious of time, so it'd be good if you ask a couple of questions. Who wants to ask a question?
Hello, how's it going? I'm Finn, I'm like a live promoter for nightclub events, and basically I was just going to ask you, what's the importance of like brand identity and kind of your lives to the importance of bringing people in? Because when I started, the whole kind of idea was like, oh, we'll do an events brand that changes genre all the time to kind of keep people interested, but turns out it's quite hard to keep a clientele with that when the thing they're coming for isn't there anymore. So I'm trying to do like a rebrand, and just how important is that kind of on your end, if that makes sense? So that's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's important. My day-to-day job outside of the crowd flat is I'm a booker for a venue in Glasgow, and this sounds like a slightly arsehole statement, but if I see a poster for a club now that's a really good poster, or the promoter's got a really good like visual catalogue of everything they've done, they generally sell more tickets. It's not necessarily about, in my opinion, for me when I'm doing like that job, it's also because I have a venue that I work for that also has a visual aesthetic. Yeah. So when I see something that also has a really cool like aesthetic, I'm more drawn to and more inclined to give them, like, for example, if two people email me and someone's got a better visual thing going on, I'm more likely to give them the weekend slot in the club or something like that, just because I know that they've put in maybe not more effort, but they maybe have a bit more experience. And I know that's not a nice way to say it or to put it, but I think it's right. And another thing is, that ties in with that, is getting sponsorship for stuff is nowhere near as difficult as it seems. Like when we were doing crowd flat stuff, we got like brew sponsorship and stuff and all that for events, and reach out to these independent breweries and stuff and they'll sponsor your events, and that'll make other people just go, yeah, that's cool, they're working with them, so of course we'll work with them.
I was going to say, so I do basically most of all the graphic design for the Forbidden Zone, which takes up too much of my time. But I literally learned that from scratch using Canva on my phone. Only very recently have I been able to upgrade to another device I can like have a bigger screen for. But I think thinking about like your connection with what you want the vibe to be, because that's really important, because you're going to attract the people of the design that you put out, you know, and the consistency is important for that, mainly because people want to know that you're there, so they can come back to it at any point, and it's easy to find, you know. And I think it's really just thinking about what event would you like to go for, and how would you like it to look. And also, if you're struggling with it yourself, to do it like with your own kind of resources or your own experience, there's so many wonderful artists in the scene, like so many, and they have Instagram accounts as well, you know, so like just contact them, probably offer them a fee. I would suggest that, because it's important, but branding's really important, and even down to like the photographer you get for a gig is important as well. Like Jordan, our house photographer, works with our branding, you know, consistently every gig. We make sure that he is there taking photos for the bands to have as well, so they can promote themselves. But yeah, just it's down to small details. So.
Can I add something to this? If you're booking a photographer, don't have red light, and if lighting engineers are going, that's not red, and it's like it looks,
I can vouch for this.
If it looks like red, it's red. I don't care if you call it magenta, right? Anyone who's worked with me over the past 10 years will know this is a bugbear of mine, and you have to be really assertive. If it's the smaller venue, the more difficult whoever's doing the lights finds this to understand, and they start gaslighting you by telling you it's not red, right? It's really irritating. But the other one is strobe lights. So strobes are really bad because it just basically excludes people who can't be in the room when there's strobe lights. So from the access point of view, don't do it. And from the other perspective, I mean, I once spent hours advising this band on a live shoot for a big show they were doing, and they literally had 5 videographers, and then it was just pure strobes for pretty much the whole gig. So it was a complete waste of money and time because you couldn't really see anything. So yeah, just that's an important interjection on the photography. I mean, Vicky, you mentioned that you spent money on design and doing posters. So it sounds like it's an element of importance for how you present yourself. What would you say to our friend at the back there?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're lucky. We have Rory, who's a fantastic designer, and kind of just ran with it and made some really cool poster designs and little glyphs and things like that. But I guess, yeah, slightly different avenue to the normal gig promoter, in that we did branch off from EHFM. And I think the brand that they created was really crucial for us getting a start, because they gave us access to a huge community that was already bought into the EHFM brand. And I was going to say as well that actually building a brand is really important for talking to potential funders as well. So if you have stuff that looks really good and you have a message that you can really clearly articulate, you can, and you have like lots of photos and kind of lots of, I guess, data from your events. If that's all really neatly packaged, you can literally just send that out to people as one. You don't have to keep rewriting the same thing. So I'd really recommend having a space where everything in your brand lives, including all the messaging and why you're great, and then you can just reproduce that for potential funders or partners or whatever.
And collect emails, have a mailing list, use MailChimp, you can set up templates on that. These are more admin things, and I know it's almost going against what we've been talking about, but those things are really, really crucial, and it's about that, being able to communicate with your audience. I still think it's better by email and in person than any spending tons of money on digital advertising, etc. I mean, Sanjeev, just to give you a quick chance on the branding and how you approach that. What advice would you give?
I think branding is important, and also, like you said, you want to do sort of different genres, and that was like something that was difficult for us, but then the way I sort of found the way around it was, if the brand isn't strong for like the platform, then make sure each individual show has its own branding. So we had a show a couple of years ago, and it was more like kind of punk rap, and it was different to anything we've kind of done before, but we made sure the branding for the show was kind of punk vibe, so to kind of tell the message. So I think that's a good way to think about if you do want to do like different sort of vibes, different genres, then I feel like that is a good way around it. And also for like photography and stuff, I think it's so important that you have a photographer, like a videographer at shows, just to capture the moment, and also make sure like your photographer or videographer gets footage of like the crowd, obviously if they're fine with that, because that's what pulls people to go to shows, when they see like the crowd's having a good time, not necessarily people performing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the way around that is just to put up posters saying this is going to be photographed and filmed. So if you're that couple that are at the Coldplay concert, then put a mask on or something. Or if you're Skyping off, if you're taking a sickie off work, hide in the corner. Has anyone else got a question? We've got time for one more. Yeah, just at the front. Yeah, Kim's going to bring you the mic. I like your shirt.
Thank you very much. Little wingtip. David Leon. I was just wondering, in terms of from an artist's perspective, how do you think artists can continue to support collectives other than just bringing people through the door? And are there any kind of green flags that you look for when you are looking for artists?
I'm going to say hi. Hi, David. How are you? I've booked David before. Something that David's actually very good at, even better than me actually, communication. Please answer your emails, answer your
Send text, please.
If I remember to ask for them, send text. But just be communicative and be open to also, especially with the DIY level, the people on the other end are also like doing their lives as well. Sometimes it's not like a case where we can't get back straight away, but just being really concise and asking the questions. We're invited to ask the questions as well. Generally DIY collectives will be very happy to answer them when they can, and if they can as well, or direct you in the right place to.
Encourage people to buy tickets in advance. I don't know what's happened since after COVID, where everyone's decided they're just going to buy on the door, which is a pain in the arse. But encourage the people who come to your shows, the people who are your friends, make sure they buy in advance, because if you're a DIY collective, there's a higher chance that a collective is going to pull their show rather than if it's DF or something like that.
Well, two last questions. I don't think any of you have had significant funding for, if any, for your events. Am I correct in that? Yeah.
We did receive some funding from the Hope Scott Trust last year, but it was around £1,000, and it helped us create higher production value. Really, I would say don't go into anything like this like relying on funding. Create something that is self-sustaining and will last. And the funding is literally just, hey, we had a desire to get like a really fancy sound system and lighting. Let's see if we can do that. It wasn't, oh well, we won't pay the artists if we don't get this funding. We won't put on the event if we don't get this funding. It was always going to go ahead, and we just wanted to see if we could get it, and we did, which was great.
So funding isn't necessary. We didn't get any funding, I think, for well over a decade. On White Days, we had 7 editions of White Days before we got Creative Scotland support. So it can be done. It's just really tough. But then magic can happen with what you do. So just really encourage you to just do it. And the last question is, what's the one bit of advice you would give to anyone that wants to set up a collective?
I'll go. I think one bit of advice would be just remember like the why. I think like as long as you remember that and that's rooted in a place of like we said, not fear but a real place, then like that's what it'll always just come back. That if you put the right energy into it and it's something that you think is can be beneficial to people, then it'll always come back somehow, even though you don't think it will.
You go.
Yeah, I would say don't start a collective for the sake of starting a collective. Start one because you have like-minded people with you who want to rally around a really strong idea or community. I would say it's even possible to start on your own. George was telling me earlier that Crowded Flat was just him for a year. So yeah, the point is the idea and the community that you're trying to serve, and as you said, as long as you have that at your centre, then it'll be a really great project, I think.
I think my advice would probably be approaching it in a non-combative way for other people. It's not a competition. A collective's not a business. I mean, it kind of has to be sometimes, and you have to make money, but it's about working with other adjacent people around you to support each other, and doing those favours here and there, and doing those collaborative projects with other people. Don't work against other people, because it's just going to end up working against yourself.
Consistency. If you want to be more, put on lots of shows and people take it seriously. It doesn't have to be like ridiculous amounts and don't put yourself into debt or anything, but no, just be consistent, work hard, and if someone doesn't come to your first 5 shows, they'll probably come to your next 5.
Thanks very much for all of you for coming. Thanks to the whole team, and particularly thanks to these amazing panelists who have given us a really great insight. Thanks very much.